Today we'll be taking a simple 8-bar loop and begin to turn it into a full song with an intro, an A section, and a B section. Let's dive right in. First off, the best way to understand a strong song structure is to go listen to one of your favorite songs. Pause this video, go do it right now. But sit down with a notebook, and every time you hear some major change, maybe the chords change, maybe there's a rhythmic change in the song, mark that down. So where we started would be our A section, and once things change, we've transitioned into a B section. Now, some songs evolve and they go on for A, B, C, D sections, etc. We'll talk about that later. But even some of the most famous classical pieces follow a very simple A, B, A structure, where we have the A section, the B section is in contrast to the A section, so it's doing something markedly different, and then we return back to the A section, something familiar with maybe some additions to it. If you've got a just simple 8-bar loop like I have right here, which has chords, drums, bass, and melody elements to it, it's really easy to take this and start structuring a full song off of that. The first thing I want to do, let's zoom way out here, and obviously I've been building my track at the beginning of this project, but what I want to do is take some of my elements and just move them down the timeline. Don't worry, we're not deleting them or anything. And if you've been working on your beat, obviously it's in the beginning of your project, the first 8 bars, but we don't want to just drop all the sound elements onto our listener right at the beginning, although sometimes that's warranted. So what I'm going to do is select all of these clips from all of my tracks and just move them down the timeline. We're going to get there eventually, but what this will help us do, we can drag certain elements over one by one. The easiest thing to probably start with is the chords. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in our first bar. As an intro, I think this is not going to sound too bad. But something I'm going to start thinking about with my structure is how the song changes every 4 or 8 bars. Since these are 8-bar phrases, that's quite a long amount of time to go without change. So I'm going to think about adding something new right here at bar 5 after the first 4 bars. It could be any element. It could be a drums element. It could be a melodic element. I think for our purposes right now, I'm going to actually grab this little arpeggiated note sound, and we're going to paste that in right here at bar 5. I'm going to shrink this down to be only 4 bars because I want everything to line up evenly. If this chordal phrase is 8 bars, I don't want to extend this beyond the 8 bars because I want to be able to work with things in even 8-bar chunks. So let's hear how that evolves. We're building the intro here, so we haven't even landed on a proper A section yet. We're just introducing people to our song. Melody comes in here. Okay, and we're ready for some change after those 8 bars. So one thing we can do is duplicate that chord progression so it happens again. And I'm actually not going to duplicate the melody. Let's hold on to that for now. But I think what we'll really need are some drums. So we're going to copy this drum loop and we're going to bring it over here, but we are not actually going to keep it as is. We're going to do a little change to it. So let me go into the MIDI note editor, and I want to build up energy gradually in this song. So something that's giving these drums a lot of energy is actually the hi-hats. So I'm going to actually select all these hi-hat notes and delete them. I also have a crash at the beginning of this phrase, which I think will be a little too abrasive to have happen right away when the drums come in. So I'm going to delete those. Now keep in mind that those changes only happened for this loop right here. If I go back down to my my pile over here, this loop is left untouched. That's why we're kind of pulling from that collection of loops to start. So let's go from the intro to what will ultimately be the beginning of our A section at bar 9. 2, 3, 4. And And remember what we talked about with having something change every 4 bars. I think this would be a good time to introduce the bass. So let's go ahead and grab our bass line. Let's copy it. Now I'm going to paste this full 8-bar bass line here. But remember, like what I said before, first of all, we want it to come in halfway. But I do need this section of the bass phrase, the bass loop, to line up with the second half of all the other loops. So instead of just taking it and starting it here, I'm going to use the full phrase and shrink it down so that we get the last 4 bars of this bass phrase so that everything lines up well. And that should progress relatively well. Let's see how it goes when this bass comes in. And I do have a little drum fill there. That's pretty good. But now let's build up to the full A section, meaning everything is playing. I talked about wanting to build up energy gradually in this track, and now it's paid off. We've gotten there. So I'm going to now build a section that has all of the sounds. In fact, I can just select all of these sounds. Melody comes back in, full bass line is going. And boom, we're lined up. So we've built up to this moment. Let's play into that so you can feel the energy change. Now, why do I call this whole section our A section if there has been such a big change? The change that has happened here in the song is basically only been in terms of energy. It's still built on the same musical ideas. The underlying chord progression and bass line hasn't changed. So I'm going to consider this just one section. Having different sections doesn't mean you can't have variation within a section. So this is sounding pretty good as our A section, but if I start to repeat this too much, it's gonna get really stale. Even if I added in our melody on top of this, repeating this again by the time we get to bar 25 is gonna feel like we need some variation. So here's how we can easily build up a B section. I'm going to copy our drums over to this next section here. And that's going to give us a little basis to do something different. And since this whole track is built up on a pretty solid chord progression, what we really should do here is come up with a new chord progression. And it should kind of sound different than our previous chord progression. Da, da, da. So I'm going to loop this 8 bars that we already have drums for right here, push the iPad to the side, and I do have my MIDI controller here where I can start to come up with a new chord progression. So our original chord progression was something like this. And if you notice something about that, I'm going up in that chord progression. And it's kind of based around this F chord. We kind of always land back on that F chord. To make something contrast for a new section, a B section, I'm going to choose different chords to focus on, and perhaps I'm going to go a different direction. Perhaps I'm going to go descending instead of ascending. So perhaps we can go from A minor to G to D minor. And then maybe we will hit that F chord again. So let's try that. As long as it's something different than the A section, I think we'll have a pretty good B section. Three, four, 1, 2, 3, 4. And a couple notes there on top. So real quick, if you've been listening to your loop a lot, it's going to sound a little bit jarring to move on from the loop you've been constantly listening to move into a new section with a new sound. But let's just give a listen, A to B. end our A section here. It's not too bad. It's not too jarring of a change, and that's exactly what we need. Something that feels like it's in the same world, but is different. Let's continue to make this B section more different. First off, it won't be difficult at all to make a bass line. We will just copy our chord progression into the bass track. We'll zoom out, and what we'll do is we'll delete every top note and keep only the root notes. Let's bring them down into the octave they need to be in, and you can see that this actually matches the octave of our previous bass line. You can also see that this bass line is built on these long notes. This one is based on these short notes. That's okay. We can have it match, but since this is a B section, let's keep the difference. And even though we kept our drums from earlier, that was just to get us an easy start into crafting a new chord progression and keep the same feel. Let's get rid of them and let's build something new. I'm thinking I want this B section to be something more of like a build-up. Maybe with a kick pattern. And then we can build up. Let's try that. 2, 3, 4. And that'll provide a nice little fill into the following section. Okay, so our B section is turning out to be just a more mellow section, which does contrast that initial A section. With overdubbing, I think I do want to add some hi-hats. 3 in the second half of this phrase. So there is some sense of build-up into the next section. Finally, I think it would be good if we added a kind of additional melodic element on top of this. Now, we could introduce a new instrument here. B sections are a great time to introduce a new sound, but I think for simplicity, I'm just going to use this sound that we already have. But I will use it in sort of a higher range than it was being used before, I think. Let's do that. And I'll come in during the second half. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the way the energy builds up in this section, it's building towards something. Well, let's go ahead and grab our A section, our fully realized A section from earlier. Let's copy it and let's paste it here at bar 33. And we had one element waiting that we didn't introduce yet. That was our little top line melody that we saved for this moment, the moment that we want to have the most energy. Now let's give a listen from the transition to the B section back to A section with the new melody on top. This B section is kind of playing the fundamental pre-chorus role, I would say. And then we're back into it, and you can see there's a clear energy level change. Not only that, our core musical elements have changed, the chord progression comes back in, but what you see here now is this build up from a very simple intro using elements that we already had in our loop. We build up very organically into what becomes sort of like a first verse kind of section, an A section, if you will, until all of our elements finally come in. Lots of energy, we're moving forward. Then the energy shifts. We bring the energy back down and we introduce a new chord progression. And ultimately, this section contrasts the previous section, making it a B section. But of course, we can always come back to our A section later. There's a lot more elements you could add in here to raise the energy level. You could add more shakers, you could add more percussion, you could add another counter melody if you wanted. But just take this as a quick example of what you can do when starting from just a short loop and it's time to come build some structure into an actual song, take it from loop to song. And like I said in the beginning, the best way to learn some good song structure, or what you think is good song structure, is to go listen to your favorite songs, sit down with a notebook, and start labeling each of these sections. Because even though we just did intro, A, B, A, you're gonna find that a lot of songs take that a lot further. A, B, C, D, back to A, B, and then introduce something totally different later in the song that makes it special. But when you start thinking of your music in terms of these kind of sections and how those sections compare and contrast to each other and build energy-wise, your music starts to be more complex and a lot stronger. Plus, you're not just stuck with a bunch of 8-bar loops that nobody wants to listen to on repeat anyway. That's gonna be all for this tutorial. If you wanna learn more about song structure, we could probably take this to the next level, so let us know if you're interested in that in the comments down below. We're always open to more video ideas from the community. That's going to be all for now. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Tatro for BandLab. Have a good one.